Mental health is such a wide spectrum. This is Hope Virgo. Hope suffers from anorexia. How are you doing, Hope?
Yeah, good, thank you.
You're looking well. You're looking very well. What's your whole experience? See, I'm not sure that people automatically would associate anorexia with mental health care. What's your experience?
So I kind of developed anorexia when I was about 13 years old. That lasted for about 4 years. And then when I was 17, I ended up getting admitted to a mental health hospital because my heart nearly stopped. So I spent a year there recovering and have managed my recovery pretty much ever since, up until last year when I had a bit of a relapse.
And what do you think then about, you know, the state of mental health services, how they've been? You've obviously got direct experience of having dealt with them over the years, and perhaps looking back, you think, well, if I'd got help at a certain time, would that have meant I wouldn't then have gone on to have more problems later?
Yeah, so I think I was lucky when I was younger because I did get that support. It took about 4 years and then a year of going to a child adolescent mental health service as an outpatient to get proper support. But my biggest problem with it is when I relapsed last year, I called out for help. I got in touch with my mental health trust in South West London, where I'm from, and they didn't offer me any support immediately. I had a quick assessment with them, and then I had a phone call, and I felt awful. I felt suicidal at times. I hated kind of everything.
Is that because, Hope, that they clinically didn't think you needed it, or they hadn't got the resources? Do you know?
It was because I wasn't thin enough to get the support. So whilst I'd lost a bit of weight, they kind of disregarded my whole back history. And at my appointment, they said that I didn't make the cut for the services because I wasn't underweight.
So they're obviously judging, you know, who needs the most help in that situation. Yeah. You were listening to what Jeremy Hunt had to say. What did you make of then the commitment that he's making? Do you think that goes far enough?
I think it's a good start. I think it's got huge potential to work, but I think a crucial thing that we're missing and that mental health service is missing is the whole thing around intervention and prevention, as the NHS kind of just waits until someone hits crisis, and I'm aware like there's a lack of funding, there's not a lot of staff trained, but you can't wait for someone to get to that crisis point before intervening. You need to kind of support them throughout that journey before it gets any worse.
OK, hang around there, Hope, but let's hear what the Labour MP and Shadow Minister for Mental Health, Barbara KEELEY, has to say about all this. Barbara, good morning to you. 1.3 billion, credit where credit's due, surely, that they're doing this.
Well, of course, it's good to have an ambition to increase the number of staff, but we are in a situation of crisis. And you've been hearing from Hope there how that a crisis affects a young person with eating disorders. 23% of children and young people who referred for treatment, like Hope, don't get it. So we are talking about a situation of crisis, and a crisis where staffing is now in a much worse position than in 2010. We're short of 5,000 mental health nurses.
And when you look at that amount of money, the £1.3 billion that's going to be spent, that is being spent, do you back the way that Jeremy Hunt is using that money? Are there different priorities that you would be using the money for?
No, I very much do believe that we need an increase in staffing, but I'm worried that there's a great deal of robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, the government a few years ago tried to put more money into child and adolescent mental health services, and local commissioners then started siphoning the money off for other NHS priorities, which is a shame. So I think we won't see this money being used in the way that Jeremy Hunt talks about it unless it's ring-fenced just for the purposes he's talking about. But it won't be. And I worry also that it isn't enough.
Well, he says it's new money.
Well, it's actually part. I mean, I think in his announcement he says it's part funding from some money that they've already talked about and committed for other purposes. And it isn't enough. I mean, across a 5-year period, this isn't enough to pay even for the extra nurses that he's talking about. And of course, psychiatrists take 13 years to train. Yeah. So that's just something we need to be thinking about. As you're hearing, the reality of Hope's experience of services is the reality of children and young people up and down the country. So what we need to make sure is that, you know, the funding could be ring-fenced to these purposes. It could then not be used for anything else, and that's a really important thing. And we could, of course, pay nurses what they deserve to earn so that we wouldn't have such a lot of difficulty in recruiting them.
Well, Jeremy Hunt has, though, suggested that he'll be looking at lifting the pay cap for nurses in recognition of the job they do.
We had a motion in Parliament a few weeks ago, and he and all the other Conservative MPs voted against it. We must scrap the pay cap and pay nurses and other NHS staff what they deserve.
But the difficulty is when you're looking at budgets, though, that's going to take an awful lot of money to do it. There are those who say that that hasn't been properly costed to enable that.
Well, we're talking about 460 billion, I think, to lift the pay cap, to increase it by 1%. If we believe that nurses are carrying out the heroic job that we all say they do, we should pay them, and then we would also not be paying agency staff, and we would make it easier to recruit.
Barbara Keeley, thanks for your input this morning. Barbara Keeley is the Shadow Mental Health Secretary. Thank you very much indeed. And Hope, how are you doing? How do you see the future? Is it a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month thing for you?
So I do manage my recovery. I think probably think about it pretty much every day, but I feel confident that I can manage it. And I have started talking more openly about it. So I've recently published a book about my kind of journey, the whole journey of recovery, looking at when it started to now. And I think I'm in a good enough place now to actually use my story to help other people to realise that recovery is possible.
And your point is early intervention may actually save a lot of money further down the line.
Yeah, I think that's critical, and I think that needs to be drawn into all future plans that we have around mental health.
OK, well, thanks very much for coming in and talking about that this morning.
Stay well.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.